Hello and welcome to PolyCosm. My name is Christina and today we'll be looking into a new Blender 2.9 feature called Sculpt Vertex Painting. It's very similar to normal vertex painting, except you can do it all in sculpt mode, so you don't have to switch between the two different modes. And the performance has been improved quite a lot from normal vertex painting. I don't know if you've ever used normal vertex painting, but it's so slow, especially with high poly meshes. If you're wondering what vertex painting might be used for, well, if you've ever sculpted a mid to high poly mesh and you want to add texture or color to it, you know it's a nightmare because you have to unwrap it, or you can just apply the texture as it is, but it just doesn't look good. So vertex painting is basically eliminating that and just adding paint on top of your model, if that makes sense. So it's kind of like working as a 2D artist, so you're just applying color to a surface basically. But the brilliant thing is you can also create masks using vertex painting, so I'll be showing you how to do that today and how to kind of put that into the shader editor. Today I'm going to be using this mirror table, which I've imported from Sketchfab using the Sketchfab add-on. And the reason I'm using this model in particular is because it has a lot of different kind of surfaces. It has a reflective surface, which is the mirror of course, and it has all the wood panels and everything. So I thought we could use Sculpt Vertex Painting to kind of create masks and just kind of create different textures using just black and white to create masks in Sculpt Vertex Painting. So yeah, let's get started. So to get this new feature, you'll need to download the most recent Blender 2.9 alpha build, which you can do from the Blender website. The link is on screen, but I'll link it in the video description and pinned comment below as well. So before you start doing any painting, just make sure that in Viewport shading you have vertex selected. By default it's set to something else, material I think, and you won't be able to see any of your painting unless vertex is selected. Next, I'd recommend finding a fairly neutral shader to see your paint better and more clearly. I usually choose the first Studio Clay shader and turn off shadow, cavity, and specular lighting. This gives us a pretty neutral base to start painting on. Oh, and just so you guys know, if you ever get problems with your brush just not painting properly, go to the Active Tools and Workspace settings panel on the right, and next to your brush preview there's a little down arrow. Press that and hit Reset Brush. That should hopefully help. There are a lot of bugs with this new feature as of now, so this is just a temporary fix until all that gets resolved. For demonstration purposes, let's import Suzanne, our little monkey, and press Ctrl 3. That basically adds 3 subdivisions, and in the modifier panel, let's apply that modifier. The thing with vertex painting is you need vertices to be able to paint. I know you're probably like, well, duh, but it took me a little while to actually get this. So the higher the poly count, the more detailed paint you'll be able to apply. Just look at the difference here. If I toggle the wireframe mode, you can see that the second Suzanne is higher poly, about 6 subdivisions, and if I try painting now, well, you can easily see the difference in detail. If you just apply paint all over, there won't be much of a difference, but if you want to get into smaller details with a smaller brush, for example, the amount of vertices will play a huge role here. So that's kind of the downside of vertex painting, I guess. If you unwrap the model, you can keep the model low poly but be able to add more high-res texture. So it's really all up to you and what you feel is more suitable for your own sculpt or model. So let's talk about the difference of normal vertex painting and the new Sculpt Vertex Painting. Let's select our very high poly Suzanne model and start painting in each mode. Just look at the difference in performance. Sculpt Vertex Painting handles painting so much faster, it's incredibly smooth. Sculpt Vertex Painting also has a lot more painting features, such as flow, wet mix, wet persistence, density, tip roundness, tip scale X, and so on. I know this is a snobby thing to say, but it just feels more artistic, if that makes sense. The only thing I'm really missing right now is color palettes, which you can find in the normal vertex painting mode, but I'm sure they'll add that in later. The reason I mentioned this is, Well, if you're in Sculpt Vertex Painting and you use a particular shade of blue, for example, and then switch to orange to paint something else, there's no way of getting that same blue. You can color pick, but just look what happens. Because the shader isn't a flat white plane and is getting affected by lights to kind of round out the form, we get a darker tone, so this can be incredibly annoying. As mentioned, I'm sure they will add this in later on, but right now they just don't have it in sculpt mode. The next really awesome thing we need to talk about is the color filter and mask by colors. Color filter basically gives you freedom to manipulate the saturation, hue, brightness, smoothness of the paint, and so on. A pro tip here is if you've started painting and you want to erase everything, instead of using white and painting all around the model, just switch to brightness color filter and drag your cursor to the far right of the screen. White basically acts as an eraser here. You can actually use color filter in combination with mask by colors, so let's paint in a bunch of colors. And with the mask brush, let's mask out this portion and jump back to color filter. If I adjust the hue now, all colors but the masked areas now get changed. I can also use the mask as a way to keep that area safe while I paint all around it. And if you want to remove the mask, just hit Alt-M. You can choose a threshold at the top and also toggle Preserve Previous Mask if you want to keep masking different parts. Okay, now that that's out of the way, let's start talking about the way Blender stores these colors. In the Object Data Properties window to the right, the little triangle, you'll see two windows for vertex colors. Vertex colors, which is for the normal vertex painting mode, and Sculpt Vertex colors, which is for the new sculpt mode feature. I know it's a bit confusing. When you start sculpting in either mode, a new layer will be created in these panels. And if we paint something in sculpt mode and then go to material preview, the paint won't show up. Huh, weird, right? That's because we haven't created a texture for the sculpt just yet. Let's open up a new window with the plus sign and set this to shader editor. Make sure object is chosen instead of world and hit new. We're going to need a color node to connect to the base color, and to get this, hit Shift A and in the search field, search vertex color. Press it and in the empty tab, select color in the drop down menu. This is referring to the color layer here. So if we rename this to monkey, for example, we'll have to choose monkey in the vertex color node. Connect this to the base color node and go to material preview mode. There we go. The model is all washed out because I haven't adjusted the lights and world settings, but let's just not worry about that right now. If you want to do the same for normal vertex painting, you'll have to Shift A, add in an attribute instead, and manually write in the layer name, which is COL. Also, as you've probably noticed, in solid shading mode, our Sculpt Vertex Painting is showing up, but not for normal vertex painting. I have no idea why that is, to be honest. Another thing I should mention is if you press the plus button after applying paint in sculpt mode, this will copy the previous layer. So if you want to do different iterations, this is a good way to do that. But if you want to start completely fresh, you can use the brightness filter and get rid of all the paint and start a new layer. This is the method we'll be using for creating masks to use for the material nodes. So now that all the paint is gone, let's choose black and paint a mask. Let's call this layer mask and add it as another vertex color node input in the shader editor. And if we now go to material preview mode, our monkey is now all black. I don't know if this is a bug, but I think this is because different Sculpt Vertex paint layers don't really work well together at the same time. So all we need to do is create a new vertex color layer, as in the normal vertex colors. Call this something like mask new, go back into sculpt mode, and while having our mask layer selected, press the Store Sculpt Vertex Color, which will copy the current layer to a normal vertex color layer above. Or if you want to transfer it completely, press Load Vertex Color. And back in the shader editor, since we know we need to add an attribute node in order to use the normal vertex color layers, let's do that with Shift A and type in Mask New. Plug that to, for example, metal, head to material rendering, and voila! All areas except for our masked area is now metal. If you want to invert the mask, all you need to do is press Shift A, search for invert, and plug that in between the two panels. We can plug this into the roughness, subsurface, or wherever we want. So, using masks, we can control shiny, matte areas, where to add metal, and just imagine if you have, for example, a painted metal material on a sculpt, but this has peeled off in certain places. This method would be perfect for that. The possibilities are endless. Another neat little trick you can use masks for is to use them for the alpha node. Using Mask New, if we plug this into alpha and in the material properties scroll down to settings, we have a few options here. We can choose to set the blend mode to alpha blend, which will create a ghostly like effect, and if we switch it to alpha clip, it will cut out that area entirely. There's also a threshold slider you can manipulate here, but it's not very effective, to be honest. Now, to demonstrate all that we've learned, let's get back to our mirror table. I want everything to be brown wood except for the mirror, which I want to be painted fully reflective obviously, and some silver painted areas. I know this can easily be textured, but for demonstration purposes I'm choosing to use Sculpt Vertex Painting for this. I'll speed up the footage while painting the wood and stop when I get to the masking bits. Okay, everything is painted brown, including the mirror. However, I want to somehow create a mask for this mirror so I'm not painting on the surrounding areas. So in edit mode, I select a mirror face, and by pressing L, I select all the faces connected to this face. Head back into sculpt mode, and with draw face sets selected, I head into the face sets tab at the top, hit face sets from edit mode selection, and while hovering over the mirror, I press H. This will isolate this particular part of the model. We want to turn the mirror completely white so we don't get a brown reflective surface, and when we're done, press Alt H. Let's create a new Sculpt Vertex layer, call it Mirror, and make it completely white to get rid of all of the brown paint. Press H on the mirror again, and let's paint it all black. Press H or Alt H to unhide the rest. I copy this over to the other layer, add in an attribute as shown before, write in Mirror New, and connect this to the roughness and metallic input. The metallic seems to be inverted, so let's add in an invert node and reverse that. And there we go. I'll repeat this process for the areas I want painted silver as well, so I'll just speed it up for that. And this is the final. Obviously I could push this much further. I could, for example, paint in the wood textures and everything, but that would kind of require me to make a more high-res model, and that isn't what this really is about. So yeah. What I ended up actually doing is kind of splitting these models up. So in edit mode, when I went in here and I had, for example, the mirror selected, I pressed P and then pressed selection. And then after that, I kind of went in and then I did the same type of masking that we've done before. This was just easier, and for some reason Blender kept crashing, so this is the only way I could actually get this working. So for example, with the silver, if we open up the texture tab here, You can see that I had the silver new, so I had the silver layer, and then I transferred it to the silver new and put it in an attribute layer, connected it to the metallic and roughness, and inverted the metallic. And for the table, I was using just the normal vertex color and connected that to the base color. So yeah, this is how it ended up looking. As mentioned earlier, this is a very new feature and there are a lot of bugs like connected to this. If you run into any like pink textures or if the masking isn't working quite right, what you can do instead of using the Sculpt Vertex Painting is just going into normal vertex paint mode and just painting it out like this and just using the vertex colors in here by connecting them to an attribute node. Because there's still a lot of bugs when transferring Sculpt Vertex colors to normal vertex colors, so if you run into that bug, just use the normal vertex colors, even though it's probably going to be a lot slower. And that is the end of the tutorial. Pretty lengthy, but hopefully I covered everything about vertex painting in Blender. If I've missed anything, or if you have any questions, please let me know in the comments below. Otherwise, thanks so much for watching, guys. Bye!